We have two cameras, one shooting the whole movie for a left eye view, one shooting the whole movie for a right eye view. And then it would be shown in theaters using two projectors. Each projector would be showing a separate version of the movie, one from the left point of view, one from the right. And the audience all wore Polaroid glasses that separated the two images and allowed them to see it.
Sadly, he says that to dim as a tiny gap.
Okay, we'll live with it.
Sorry.
So rather than me explaining this, I can actually show you a film that explains it a little bit better. So again, bear with us. The red-blue 3D system in here probably not going to work as well as the broken projector, but you'll get the idea.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Roy Miller. You know, I feel very privileged that I'm about to become the first actor ever to appear before the public in natural vision, 3 dimension. Now, I assume that you all have your magic glasses on. And that you have them on straight. Good. Now, so far, you've seen only 2 of my dimensions, up and down, that is, height and width. And now, Mr. Projectionist, up there in the booth, would you be kind enough to give us the 3rd dimension? Thank you. And the 3rd dimension, as you well know, is depth. It's rather remarkable, isn't it? Oh, I beg your pardon. It's time for meeting!
Mr. Nolan, it's me, Beanie, and my best pal, Cecil, the Caesar fan.
Well, if it isn't our good friends Beanie and Cecil, the famous time for theater program.
I don't see that. Do you see that, Cecil?
No, it's a flat world to me, Beanie Boy.
Now listen, Beanie, you haven't been listening. I told you to see depth, you have to use the magic glasses.
Okay, you're on this going.
Golly, Cecil. Look.
What do you know? The world really is wrong. Look at me. Look at me, Beanie Boy.
I'm looking.
What? Amelia? Hey, what the heck? Your head is round like a balloon, Beanie.
Like a balloon?
Yeah.
What do you mean, Cecil?
Well, I mean your head.
Huh?
Just spit it up. Show me. Look, see the there? The balloon?
Yeah.
Like what?
Don't go after much. I think that's enough, see? No more, see? No more. That's enough, see? That's enough. See?
Wow! Okay, dude. I'll be right back.
First, we have the silence. Next, we have the talkies. And third and last, we have the round. Hey, fellas, I'm here too. Very lovely, isn't she? I'm sure you'd like to meet her. Shirley, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to have you meet Miss USA, Miss Shirley Tate.
Can you tell me, Lloyd, how to get this wonderful feeling of space around me? This new sense of freedom. Suddenly, I'm no longer a flat picture. I feel alive, as though I could walk right out to the street.
You're walking right into their lives.
But how do you get this feeling of space?
Well, the same way you do, by using 2 eyes instead of 1. You see, come here, I'll show you. Here's the equipment through which we photograph natural vision. It's very revolutionary. All this, and a great deal more, of course, at last makes it possible to photograph a feature-length picture in 3 dimensions.
Why is natural vision different from previous attempts at third dimension?
Because for the first time, it duplicates the miracle of the eyes. In photography, as in real life, 2 eyes are better than 1.
Why is it necessary to wear glasses to do three-dimensional motion pictures?
Well, Shirley, perhaps you'd better ask an eye specialist that question. As a matter of fact, it was just such an ophthalmologist who had a great deal to do with the developing of natural vision.
To answer your question, Mister, the only way possible in known science for audiences to successfully view true three dimension is through the use of glasses.
Are these the same as Polaroid sunglasses?
Not exactly, but made of the same material.
Tell me, how does natural vision affect the eye?
When natural vision standards of photography and projection are adhered to, your eye will function as in human nature, which is healthy and beneficial. You should leave the field of mind relaxed and refreshed as never before in viewing a motion picture.
So that short film was actually used as an introduction for Blonde Devil to explain to audiences how the movie that they were about to see had been created. Now, Blonde Devil was by no means a critical success, but audiences loved seeing this 3D. And it opened around Thanksgiving of 1952 and made quite a bit of money. Drew the attention of the major Hollywood studios. So first out of the gate at Warner Brothers, they said, they're using natural vision, we want natural vision. And they hired the natural vision company and went rapidly into production on the movie House of Wax at the beginning of 1953. And you can see that they were actually hoping to be the first major studio to put out a 3D movie. They're marketing so. Let's take a look at a little bit of House of Wax.
I won't let you do it, and I'll kill you if you try.
Don't be stupid. All you have to do is to strike a match, and the thing is done.
Keep your head down or I'll knock you in the chin. Look out! Turn! That's a good hat you're wearing now. I wonder if I can put the flower up. Hold steady now, don't move your head, or you'll lose the powder on your nose. Now, there's someone who looks like a popcorn. Close your mouth, this is the bag I'm handing out. Knock you down, so there she comes. Well, where that is in the bag. They always said it's an ancient times, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the guy in torture and on the luck. This is our chamber of horrors, and pass the time of day with the notorious murderer. And the axe. Thrills, chills, and laughter, all nice within the reach.
I hope you don't think I've gone too far hiring this fellow to bring people in. It does make it sound a little like a cycling club. For a week or two, once we're established, we won't need that sort of thing.
knew it. I knew it all the time.
Not you, my man, after it, for I will give you eternal.
So, Warner Brothers, as I said, planned for this to be the first studio movie in 3D. What they didn't know was that Columbia had also gone into production on a 3D movie on a noir film called Man in the Dark. And Columbia got Man in the Dark into theaters 2 days before House of Wax. So they kind of missed out on that and ended up changing their marketing to say the first color studio movie in 3 dimensions. So House of Wax was released into theaters. It actually did very well, and all of the studios jumped into the fray wanting to make their own 3D pictures. And quite a few went into production in the early months of 1953. Universal's first entry into 3D was the science fiction story It Came from Outer Space, based on a story by Ray Bradbury. We can take a look at some quotes from that.
Can you see it?
Yeah. Yeah, there it is. By the old Excelsior mine.
The music.
Look at that! What is it?
What are you doing here?
I have been waiting for you.
We've been looking all over for you. Are you all right?
Yes.
Take you home.
No. Take me to the mine.
Oh, no. No, please.
There. You're dressed in her clothes, but you're not Ellen.
They're on their way here. You brought them.
Listen to me. I came here to warn you. I tried to stop them. Now, you don't know how I tried. You've got to get out.
few more hours.
Listen to me. You wanted me to fall into that. Why?
You can no longer be trusted.
Whoever you are, whatever you are, listen to me.
I'm sorry. We did not want to use violence. Now there's no other way.
So plenty of other 3D movies followed throughout the year, and not just in the horror and science fiction genres. There were costume dramas and westerns. A lot of studio big budget pictures were put into 3D production. And there were independent films as well, including one of my personal favorites, Robot Monster. Robot Monster, independent production, considered one of the worst movies ever made. For a long time, it's been very hard to see it in 3D. We're actually very thrilled that the 3D Film Archive has been working this year on a restoration of this movie in 3D. The three of us are actually recorded for commentary track on the Blu-ray that's coming out in June. It's Bayview Entertainment is releasing it. And we actually need to give a shout out to the 3D Film Archive for providing a lot of the material that we're showing on screen today. So, Robot Monster is a real favorite of mine. I may actually at home have a gorilla suit and a space helmet. Let's take a look at a little bit of Robot Monster. And I should say this is from an early version of the work in progress of the restoration that's being done. So you'll have to bear with a little bit of time code showing.
What are you doing here, boy?
My sister isn't coming.
So they sent you?
I came by myself. I wanted to find out what you had against me.
You are human. Your people were getting too intelligent. We could not wait until you were strong enough to attack us. We had to attack you first.
I think you're just a big boy, picking on people smaller than you are.
Now I will kill you.
Pooped out pinwheel.
The calcinated death ray really cannot harm you.
That's the billion bubble machine. It gets its own credit.
Great thanks. I have discovered the secret of our failure to destroy the remaining humans. Our C-ray, the calcinated death ray, cannot penetrate them. They have been made immune to the antibiotic serum. Now I set you into motion. 1, destroy the girl. 2, destroy the family. Fail, and I will destroy you. I cannot, yet I must. How do you calculate that? At one point of the draft, I must and cannot meet. Yet I must. What I cannot.
I love this movie so much. And I should point out, the little boy, Johnny, was played by an actor named Gregory Moffat. And, oh, wow, it's dark in here. Greg just turned 80, and we interviewed him in 3D for bonus material on the Blu-rays. You can keep an eye on our websites. We're hoping once this is available this summer that we'll be able to do some actually full-on 3D proper screenings of Robot Monster for audiences. So, Robot Monster was followed by Arena and Maze. As I said, we had all kinds of movies, dramas, and noir, and westerns. Throughout 1953, especially there are a lot of 3D movies in production in the summer of 1953.
Do you have the redheads from Seattle to show us?
I don't have a clip from that, but that one is available on 3D Blu-ray. The Glass Web is a great one. That's being restored and should be out later this year. Hondo, of course, a John Wayne Western and a really excellent 3D movie. Even Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin made a 3D comedy called Money from Home. Oh, and The French Language, Jane Russell in 3D. That's a real treat. That one still needs to be restored. So those were all of the 3D movies that were actually released in 1953, but there were a whole bunch more that were produced in 1953 and released in 1954. And the 3D craze had kind of started to fizzle out. In 1954, there really weren't many movies in production in 3D. Some were still being released. Some that had been filmed in 3D didn't actually get released in 3D. One example is The Command at Warner Brothers was filmed twice. They filmed it in 3D and they filmed it in CinemaScope. And then they decided to only finish editing the CinemaScope version. So the 3D version still sits in a vault somewhere at Warner Brothers unedited. And the 3D fad of the 1950s pretty much ended with the 1955 release of Revenge of the Creature, the sequel to the previous year's 3D Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, there were also a whole bunch of 3D short subjects. All the animation studios got involved. Disney, Warner Brothers, Universal, Paramount released 3D cartoons. And there were also a number of 3D live action and stop motion subjects. And yes, even the Three Stooges made 2 3D films, Spooks and Pardon My Backfire. With all of the Three Stooges antics, Moe poking you in the eyes and everything, it's kind of a no-brainer to do the Three Stooges in 3D. Let's take a little look at Spooks.
What a hideous monstrous
Come on, I'll bash the heads in, then I'll get the keys, and then I'll...
Don't do it! Don't!
I hate vanilla. They really got it.
So there's an interesting connection between the Three Stooges and 3D comic books. The two gentlemen in this picture are comic book artists Joe Kubert, seated, and Norman Maurer, standing. Norman was Mo Howard's son-in-law, and these are the two guys who invented 3D comic books in 1953. Along with Norman's brother Leonard, they came up with a process where they put comic book artwork on animation cells, photographed it from the left eye, shifted it to the left and the right, and rephotographed it to create the right eye version. They called the process 3D Illustereo, and they started up a company, the American Stereographic Corporation, to pitch this concept of 3D comic books to the comic book publishers. They demonstrated it to just about everyone, but they ended up licensing it to a comic book publisher, Archer Station. And they went into production on what would become the first 3D comic book, three-dimension comics starring Mighty Mouse. And page from inside. Again, I apologize if the colors in the projector don't quite match the glasses. This was the first 3D comic book, and it sold incredibly well when it came out in the summer of 1953. They sold like how many copies of this thing?
A million. It came out July 3rd, 1953, with a September date, and sold out immediately. So he printed another million.
And a second run of comic books was not a common thing back then. Now, one thing you'll notice is all monochrome black and white imagery, and that's because when you're using these red and blue glasses to look at a 3D image, you may have noticed you don't actually get all the color that would be in there. And they didn't have a really good process to reproduce colors. What they do is they create the left art and the right art and print one of them in red and one of them in blue or green. But the comic book really took off. As Lawrence said, they sold 1 million copies of the first printing,
Yogi.
and then did a second run of another 1 million. And of course, they followed this up at St. John with a number of other 3D titles, including Norman's father-in-law, the Three Stooges. There's a couple panels from in there. Now, this is kind of interesting. You know, at that point in 1953, the Three Stooges were Mo, Larry, and Shemp. This comic has been reprinted. Was it in the 80s?
Yeah.
And they had an artist come in and redraw Curly over Shemp's head. Here's another page. Joe Kubert had character Tor and his prehistoric monkey Chi-Chi. They got into the business of horror comics with the House of Terror. And A Picture of Evil is a really great story. These St. John comic books are all in the public domain now, and you can go to there's an online comic book archive. You can actually download these comics to look at. They did a parody comic book that was sort of St. John's answer to Mad Comics. They called it Whack. And they actually did a really funny self-referential story called the 3D Tees about a pair of comic book artists who are doing 3D comic books and kind of go mad doing it. And caricatured themselves in the comic story. They actually followed that up later with another one where they made fun of one of their competitors. And they did so well that lots of other comic book publishers jumped in and started publishing their own comic books, figuring out their own methods to create the artwork. And again, comic books in just about every genre were being released in the middle of 1953 in 3D printings. And this is actually probably a good time to talk a little bit about the glasses. The glasses that you're wearing today, the ones with red and blue lenses, those are called anaglyphic glasses. They're using color to separate the left and the right images. And there's a misconception about 3D movies in the 50s. People didn't use red and blue glasses to watch 3D movies in the 50s. They used polarized glasses. These are actual 1950s 3D polarized glasses. They're actually not too different from the kind of glasses you get when you go to a theater today to see a 3D movie. So, with printed material like a comic book, the only way to separate the left and right images and have them both printed on the same page would be through opposing colors. So that's why they used red and blue glasses in the 50s. It's not the most ideal way to view 3D, but it worked for printed material. As I said, the movies were all shown using polarized glasses. But the comic books all came with their own red and blue or red and green glasses. They all had instructions on how you punch them out and fold them up and put them on to look at the comic books. And as I said, just about every major comic book publisher jumped in. National DC did a Superman and a Batman. There's a couple pages from those. Harvey Comics actually hired Jack Kirby to create Captain 3D, the 3D superhero. He actually gets his powers by putting on a pair of 3D glasses. And they used him for their advertising as well. Let's see, there was Sheena the Jungle Queen. Who was the publisher for Sheena?
Fiction House.
Fiction House. And there she is in 3D. Harvey came up with their own process and did quite a few. Adventures in 3D was a fun one, and they did, all of these comics had a full color cover, and then a black and white or a red and blue interior. Harvey recreated the covers in 3D for the interior of the comics. And over at EC, they, of course, did a couple of their horror comics. And in fact, EC, this is kind of interesting, they had seen the demonstration of the Illustrario process. Al Feldstein decided that they could probably figure out their own way to do it. And he actually did a patent search, found there was an existing patent for creating 3D anaglyphic art. And EC bought that patent and then turned around and sued Hubert Bauer and St. John's. The case eventually got thrown out, but it was an interesting case and sort of led to partially the demise of 3D comic books. Here's some stuff from inside the EC Comics. But by the end of 1953, just about every comic book publisher, the sales had diminished, and they all went back to publishing full-color, standard, flat 2D comic books. Although several publishers introduced what they called 3D without glasses, which was sort of a false gag. All they did was they drew the characters outside of the panel lines, and then said, hey, it's 3D. In the 1980s, 3D comic book publisher Ray Zone took a lot of these comic books and actually converted them to proper 3D. So you can find many of these as published reprints from the 80s in 3D. As I said, by the end of 1953, the studios weren't really making any more 3D movies. The publishers weren't really making any more 3D comic books, and the fad had pretty much fizzled out. And at this point, I'm going to turn to the gentleman to my left here and ask you guys, you're 3D historians. First off, how did you get interested in 3D? And then, why do you think this 3D fad was so brief in 1953?
You want me to start? Sure.
Sure, Mike.
Well, when I was a kid, I got hit with a double whammy. Our local NBC affiliate back in South Carolina tried to play Revenge of the Creature in anaglyphic format, and it didn't work. But 3 weeks later, my parents took me to see Friday the 13th Part 3. I was 11 years old. What a terrible upbringing. But it was really an eye-opener. And so I got very, very interested in the medium and pursued it. As far as my thoughts on the brevity of the medium in 1953, it's kind of, in my estimation, it's a bit of a complicated story, and I don't want to make this a complicated story to tell you.
Buy his book.
Yeah, my book. Hopefully it'll be ready sometime this year. It's in progress, and I really, really have turned up a lot of sources and some interesting things. As was mentioned, when they projected 3D movies in 1953, they used linear polarizers, and it absolutely required 2 synchronized projectors, and that was a very difficult undertaking. There was a man named Gene Polito. He helped engineer Universal's 3D camera rig, and they sent him to Moab, Utah in the summer of 1953 to repair one of the camera rigs on the set of a movie called Taza, Son of Cochise. He gets the camera rig repaired. He and his buddy are going to come back to Hollywood, but while they're waiting for their flight, they stop in at a little theater displaying a rival studio's 3D picture. They go in and it looks terrible. So Polito goes to the manager and he begs and begs. He says, "You gotta let me go upstairs to the projection booth." And the manager, took a little persuading, but finally he's persuaded. They go upstairs and Polito said he walked in and the projectionist, very earnest man, seemed like a really, sweet human being. He even describes him as wearing one of those little conductor's caps like they wear on the railroad, right? And he's sort of squinting, looking through the window, and he knows something's wrong, but he doesn't know how to fix it. And apparently what was going on in this case was that the left and right pictures, they weren't playing at the same speed. Maybe they were even drifting farther and farther apart. But Polito, hey, he helped build these things. So he goes over, the man's running what they call, we won't get too technical, but there were two ways of interlocking projectors, with Selson motors or with a mechanical interlock. This guy was running the mechanical kind, and thank heaven it used flexible cables that ran to what Polito called it a turnbuckle. It's sort of like a differential. And he was able to take this thing and rotate it and slowly bring the projectors back into sync. And he told the man, "Listen, if you ever have this problem again, just do what I just did." So he goes down to his buddy that traveled with him from Universal, from Hollywood to Moab, and they're, "Hey, how does it look now, Skip?" "It looks great. I don't know what you did, but it looks a lot better." But I tell you this story to kind of illustrate how tricky it was to show dual strip 3D. And I'll probably just leave it at that. I've got some more to say, but it's all in my book. Keep your eyes out.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out that in addition to all the technical difficulties of having synchronized projectors and keeping them aligned, and if one film broke and you had to cut frames out, you had to find the exact same frames in the other one and cut those out. There were a lot of technical issues. There was also a whole financial consideration. The studios had to send twice as many prints to the theaters because they needed a left version of the movie and a right version of the movie. And these were big 4,000-foot reels. They had to have an intermission because most theaters only had 2 projectors for changeovers, but both projectors were being used for 3D. So they'd have to have an intermission just to change the reels. Also, in a union theater, since both projectors were running, they had to pay 2 projections. The theaters didn't like that.
Yeah. Let me add one other thing that gets overlooked. If you read Richardson's Blue Book of Projection, it was recommended at the time that you rewind a print at only double the speed that you'd use to project it. So the film goes through the projector at 90 feet per minute. So they're saying, okay, you can rewind at 180 feet per minute. What it amounts to is that rewinding a dual strip 3D print took equally as long. If you're gonna do it right, it took equally as long as showing it.
Yeah. And the other thing I had mentioned earlier, Warner Brothers opted to film the command in both CinemaScope and 3D, and then decided they'd only release the CinemaScope. Well, 20th Century Fox they released 2 3D movies, but they put all their money into CinemaScope, which at the time was being billed as 3D without the glasses. It was essentially just an anamorphic widescreen. But you only needed 1 print, you only needed a special lens on the projector, you could do changeovers. It was relatively easy to do, and in the end, CinemaScope won out over 3D. Now, in comic books, Lawrence, what would you say was the demise of the comic book in 3D?
Well, it was pretty much a novelty. They sold 2 million of the first comic, so everybody made them, so they were everywhere. It was no longer a novelty, and they did the 2 romance books, and they only sold 10% of a normal book, whereas the first ones were selling 90%. And back then they would do 300,000 copies, not 1 million or 2 million. But it got old, they cost more, and the end. With movies, there were single print options, but nobody picked it up. It all started with dual prints, and that's what carried through. But if they'd gone to a single print, it might have lasted, because it would have been a lot easier on the exhibitor, and that's what really killed overall.
Yeah, there was a lot of infighting over like whose glasses would be the standard, and a lot of the business end of it got in the way.
Yeah, they couldn't make the glasses fast enough originally.
Yeah.
To have enough.
What's curious about that, I'll mention, Polaroid had to rely on Eastman Kodak to provide a material called cellulose acetate butyrate, and and the Clayton Antitrust Act was such that, Kodak's happy to sell it. You just have to pay a deposit in advance. And so in late 1952, when Guana Devil blew up, Polaroid were basically caught with their pants down. They didn't see it coming. And they spent the first few months of 1953 really scrambling to manufacture millions and millions of pairs, and they'd never made that many before. So it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, all told, there were 50 pictures produced between Guana Devil and Revenge of the Creature. Not all of them got a full 3D release, but there were 50 of them that were made in 3D. And as I mentioned, a number of them have been restored and are available to watch on a 3D TV, 3D Blu-ray, or even in a theater. And a lot of that is thanks to our friends at the 3D Film Archive. We've only got a few minutes left. Let me just give a little plug here for some websites where you can get a little more information. I've mentioned the 3D Film Archive. They have great resources on their website. A lot of the images that you saw from the comic books, you can view much better with the glasses. And you keep the glasses, take them home, go to the 3D Film Archive website, and look at all of these on your computer screen where it's going to look beautifully. The National Stereoscopic Association is a national organization for 3D photographers and enthusiasts. They hold a 3D convention every year called 3DCon. So if you like this kind of presentation, we have a whole convention of 3D. This year it's going to be in August in Buffalo, New York, and you can get all the information there. And of course, 3D Space, that's the museum I run in Los Angeles. We have a gallery space with all kinds of 3D material on display. I give personal tours of the museum, and I'd love for anyone who's interested to check out the website. And if you find yourself in the Echo Park neighborhood of LA, make an appointment to come on by the museum.
The QR codes are on the glasses.
The QR code on the glasses will take you to the 3D Space website. And yeah, I'd love to open it up to questions. One right here.
Yeah, why do you think the studios gave up on 3D for home theater a few years ago?
Yeah, that's a really good question. They kind of put the cart before the horse, and they released all these 3D TVs before there was anything to watch on them. And it came 2 years after they required everyone to switch from analog to digital TV. So everyone had just gone out and bought new TVs, and now they were all being told, well, now if you want 3D, you have to buy a new TV, plus a new Blu-ray player, plus a new amp sound system that understands how to pass that 3D signal to your TV. And there's only 3 movies you can get right now, and the glasses are proprietary, so you can't use Samsung glasses on a Panasonic TV. There were a lot of problems, a lot of missteps when the 3D TVs came out. By 2016, they'd ironed all of that out. There were great 3D TVs coming out. They worked with the same glasses that they use in the theaters. There were like 300 Blu-rays you could get. But the sales just hadn't been there, so the manufacturers stopped making 3D TVs. A lot of people who are watching 3D at home today actually do it with a projector, because you can get 3D projectors pretty easily.
Yeah, the original 13 Ghosts came out around 1960.
Yeah.
Now, was that the only way you could see the ghosts was to have 3D glasses on? Now,
We needed a ghost view.
what broke my heart is when they did the remake, only the people in the movies could wear it. But so anyway, are those in your archives?
Yeah. In fact, I do have a pair of the original Ghost viewers. While it's not 3D, William Castle loved his gimmicks, and he did something really clever. Whenever the characters in the movie would put on the Ghost viewer, the film would switch to color, red and blue. So if you looked through the blue filter, you'd see the ghosts, and if you looked through the red filter, you wouldn't see the ghosts. And you had your own Ghost viewer. Yeah, we have an original Ghost viewer in the collection, and we actually have a reproduction. William Castle, in the beginning of the movie, shows you how to use it, and he's got a really cool ghost-shaped Ghost viewer. We did a screening of 13 Ghosts a couple of years ago and reproduced his Ghost viewer for it. So
cool.
Thank you.
So, if I'm not incorrect, I think Coming At You, the spaghetti western, was kind of the resurgence or revival of 3D, and then you had, of course, Jaws 3D and Friday the 13th 3D. But why did they bring it back in 1981? I'm just curious.
Yeah, 3D sort of has been kind of a roller coaster. It has its peaks of popularity, and then outside of the theme parks kind of disappears in theaters for a while. And Coming At You did kind of launch a revival in the 80s. There's a lot of very cheesy sci-fi and horror movies in the 80s.
Right.
There's a new generation, plus they finally figured out how to do the single strip 3D.
Yes, yeah. What they were able to do, instead of having to have 2 projectors running, they actually printed it on a single film where they had both the left and the right squeezed into a frame. And then they used a special lens or a mirror box to split it back into 2 and project both images on the screen through polarizing filters. So they were still using polarizing glasses and polarizing filters, but they only had 1 projector and they didn't have to worry about the sync. And interesting side note, there's another Three Stooges connection to the 1980s 3D movies. There was the first 3D animated feature film was Star Chaser, The Legend of Orin in 1985.
Oh, the French Canadian?
No, it was actually a Korean production.
Oh, that.
But the screenplay was written by Mo Howard's grandson. So there's actually 3 generations in Mo's family that have strong connections to historical 3D. And they're telling us we're coming to the end of our time. So I hope you all enjoyed our 3D presentation. And again, if you'd like to learn more, you can visit the website there. And I think I've got some postcards in my pocket. It'll be picking up in the hallway. Thank you so much.
Okay, good.
And let's have a big round of applause for my
Thank you.